Today we're going to talk about thermal expansion tanks and the proper way to install a thermal expansion tank. This is a basic cutaway of a standard thermal expansion tank, and you can see that in these expansion tanks there is a diaphragm inside here, this rubber diaphragm, and on the top side of this is where your water would come into the tank, and then on the bottom side, trapped between the diaphragm and the bottom of this thing, is air, compressed air. And so what happens is, as water comes in, this diaphragm moves down and compresses against the air because air is compressible and water isn't. And then once you opened a faucet or turned on flow again, the compressed air would force the diaphragm back up and force all the water out of the tank and into the system. So that's kind of how a thermal expansion tank works. Now the important part of this is that the air charge on the air side of this, the pressure charge on the air side of this, has to be equal to the system pressure. The way you determine system pressure is, before you start installing the thermal expansion tank, you take a pressure gauge and you connect it to something in the house or a hose bib or whatever to determine what your standard pressure is. In most cases it's probably going to be somewhere between 50 and 80 psi. It might be lower than that, but generally you'd figure it somewhere in there. These tanks come pre-charged from the factory depending upon which manufacturer has built it or produced it, and they're going to come with anywhere from a 20 to a 40 psi pre-charge. So if you have 50 pounds of water pressure coming in and you only have 40 pounds of air pressure, this diaphragm is going to be like this in the tank all the time. And even if you open a faucet, you only have 40 pounds here and you have 50 pounds here, so it's not going to force the water out of the tank. So you're just going to have a tank full of water. That's why you need to start out by figuring out what your pressure is, and then charging the expansion tank by taking this cover off the top of it. And all I have here is a standard air pressure gauge. This one happens to be digital, but you can use any air pressure gauge. And you put it on there and you read it. In this case, this one says 40 psi. It's pre-charged to 40 psi from the manufacturer. You take a standard compressed air tank or a compressor with a chuck, hook it onto here, and pressurize that to whatever you decided previously your system pressure was, equal to that system pressure. And once you got that information, then you're ready to go ahead and install it. Do not install the tank until you've got your air pressure set where you want it to be, because if there's any water in this tank on the water side of the diaphragm, when you go to pressurize the air, you aren't going to get an accurate reading. Once you're ready to install it, you turn off the supply pressure going into the water supply going into the building. You turn off whatever fuel source you have going to your heater, whether it be electric or gas. Then you install the tank on the cold water inlet side. So you would take this tank, and the blue piece comes off, and then you've got standard threads here that you would thread in. Typically it's a 3/4 inch thread, and that would get threaded into a T. We'd like to see the tank installed vertically, either this way or this way, but it can be installed horizontally. Just remember, if you install it horizontally, because it's the only way you can do it, this tank is sometimes full of water, so it has weight with it. So you have to support the tank if you're going to install it horizontally, or even if you're going to install it vertically down, you're going to have to provide some kind of support so that it doesn't pull down on your piping, especially if you're using PEX or CPVC or something like that for your water piping, because it has no structural support itself. So you install it, you support it, you've already charged it, it's ready to go. The next thing you do is you go back and you turn your water supply back on. Then you're going to turn on your heater and whatever heat source you have, and you're going to open a hot faucet. The reason you want to open the hot faucet is to bleed any air that you may have introduced into the system out of the system while you are while you were doing your installation. Once you bleed out that air, then all you've got to do is reapply or get your pressure where you want it, turn off the faucet, and you should be ready to go.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.